The mystery around their deaths remains unsolved, but now Russian investigators have decided to reopen the case.
In 1959, 9 skilled hikers vanished in Russia's Ural Mountains under terrifying and unexplained circumstances. Their bodies were later found scattered, some barefoot, others fatally wounded, with no clear cause. For decades, the Dyatlov Pass mystery has fueled speculation, avalanches, military experiments, amongst others. But now, the case is finally solved. The Dyatlov Pass mystery is no longer a puzzle, just a deeply human story with an ending no one wanted. Into the frozen abyss, the journey that was never meant to end. In January 1959, 10 young Soviet hikers, mostly students and recent graduates from the Ural Polytechnic Institute, set out on a challenging ski expedition deep into the remote wilderness of the northern Ural Mountains. The group was led by 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, a respected engineering student and seasoned outdoorsman known for his discipline, caution, and leadership skills.
And I remember I had that document. Dyatlov Pass is a very famous story about these hikers that go missing in the 1950s. They were hiking into the Ural Mountains.
All members of the group were experienced hikers, prepared for the unforgiving Siberian winter. Their goal was to reach Mount Otorten, a remote and rugged peak north of their departure point in Sverdlovsk. The group included Yuri Doroshenko, 21, known for his strength and fiery spirit; Lyudmila Dubinina, 20, a civil engineering student with a serious demeanor and a reputation for determination; Zinaida Kolmogorova, 22, a physics student described as cheerful and reliable; Rustam Slobodin, 23, an athletic and thoughtful man who practiced long-distance running; Alexander Kolovatov, 24, a quiet and methodical student of nuclear physics; Nikolai Thibault Brignol, 23, a fun-loving and sharp-minded geophysics student; Semyon Zolotaryov, 38, the oldest member and a mysterious, battle-hardened World War II veteran with extensive survival skills; and Yuri Krivonyshenko, 23, known for his sense of humor and musical talent. On January 28th, one member of the group, 21-year-old Yuri Yudin, fell ill with joint pain and fatigue, likely triggered by a chronic health condition. Reluctantly, he turned back while the rest of the group continued onward. His decision to return would ultimately save his life. He became the expedition's sole survivor. The remaining 9 pushed ahead, skiing through dense forests, open tundra, and steep mountain slopes. The route they followed was treacherous, chosen to earn them a Category 3 certification, the highest level of difficulty recognized in Soviet winter hiking.
To take this thing called their Level 3 hiking test, which sounds really lame, but it's actually like the highest level of mountaineering in Russia at the time.
The group carried carefully packed supplies: warm clothing, skis, ice axes, a portable stove, food, and photographic equipment. Their expedition had been officially reviewed and approved by the Sverdlovsk Committee of Physical Culture. In every way, this was a well-prepared and well-organized journey. The hikers kept detailed journals and took dozens of photographs along the way. These records show a group in high spirits, laughing, posing, skiing, and pushing forward together. For days, they endured sub-zero temperatures, biting wind, and deep snowdrifts, but they remained focused. Igor Dyatlov's notes reflect a well-coordinated team making steady progress despite the brutal weather. Then came February 1st. That evening, the group set up their final camp on the eastern slope of a mountain called Kholat-Syakhl, known by the indigenous Mansi people as the Mountain of the Dead, and it marked the beginning of the day they were ever seen alive again. This sudden silence would soon send shockwaves across the Soviet Union, as concern turned to horror when the rescue mission began and discovered something no one could explain. Tent of Terror. What the rescuers found changed everything. On February 20th, 9 days after the hikers were supposed to return, officials launched a rescue operation. The search quickly grew into a large operation. Soldiers, local volunteers, university students, and seasoned mountaineers were sent into the snowy wilderness. Freezing winds and thick snow made the search extremely difficult. After several days of combing the area, searchers made a discovery on February 26 that raised far more questions than answers. The group's tent was found on the slope of Kholat-Syakhl. The tent had collapsed and was partially buried under snow. But what disturbed investigators most was that it had been cut open from the inside. The hikers had not simply left the tent, they had sliced their way out, as if something inside had frightened them badly. Inside the tent, nearly all of the hikers' clothing and gear had been left behind. Boots, coats, blankets, and even food were neatly arranged. Nothing indicated that they had left in an orderly or planned way. It appeared they had fled into the freezing night in a state of panic, barefoot, wearing only socks or underwear. Rescuers followed a set of footprints that led away from the tent and toward a nearby forest. Strangely, the tracks suggested the hikers had walked calmly, not run. There were no signs of a chase or struggle. The prints continued for nearly a mile before vanishing into the snow. Near the edge of the forest, beneath a tall cedar tree, the first two bodies were found, Yuri Doroshenko and Georgy Krivonishenko. Both were dressed only in underwear. A small fire had been built nearby, but it had burned out. One man had burns on his hands, the other had deep injuries to his knuckles. Investigators believed they may have climbed or clawed at the tree, possibly in desperation to escape something or to see above the forest line. 3 more bodies were discovered between the tree and the tent: Igor Dyatlov, Zenaida Kolmogorova, and Rustem Slobodin. Their positions suggested they had been trying to return to the tent. One had a fractured skull, another had severe bruises. But again, there was no clear evidence of external attack or struggle. For weeks, the search continued with no further results. Then, in early May, as the snow began to melt, search teams made a much more disturbing discovery. 4 more bodies were found in a ravine deeper in the woods. These victims, Lyudmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolovatov, Semyon Zolotaryov, and Nikolai Thibault Brignol, had suffered devastating injuries. Lyudmila was missing her eyes, tongue, and part of her lips. 2 others had crushed rib cages, and 1 had a shattered skull. The medical examiner compared the internal trauma to injuries from a high-speed car crash. Yet strangely, the bodies showed little to no damage to the skin. There were no open wounds, bruises, or external signs of blunt force. With each body recovered, the question grew louder. What could have terrified and injured these skilled hikers so severely, yet left no trace of an attacker? It was only decades later that the mystery was finally solved with the help of video evidence. But before that, Soviet authorities stepped in to take control of the investigation, and in doing so, they raised more questions than they answered. Silence and secrecy: how the Soviet state handled the horror. In May 1959, Soviet investigators officially closed the case on the mysterious deaths of 9 young hikers in the Ural Mountains. Their conclusion was vague and unsettling. The group had died due to a compelling natural force. The case was closed, and the investigation files were locked away in government archives for decades. This unexplained phrase, compelling natural force, only raised more questions than it answered. To the public, it sounded like a convenient excuse, not a real explanation. It didn't clarify what actually happened to those hikers, or why they fled their tent barefoot into the freezing wilderness in the middle of the night. The official reports left out key information, ignored unusual details, and avoided any deeper investigation. As time went on, people began to suspect that the government was hiding something. The mystery deepened when it came to light that some of the hikers' clothing had tested positive for radiation. At first, officials claimed the radioactive traces came from the Kishtim disaster in 1957, a major nuclear accident that had contaminated large parts of the region. But this explanation didn't add up. Only a few pieces of clothing showed radioactive contamination, and those items belonged to hikers who had never been near the fallout zone. No one ever explained how the radiation got there, or why only some hikers were affected. Adding to the strangeness were accounts from local Mansi tribespeople, who reported seeing unusual orange lights in the sky around the time the hikers died. Their stories were quickly dismissed as superstition or folklore, and never seriously followed up. Even more disturbing was one of the last photographs recovered from the hikers' cameras. Among many pictures of snowy landscapes and smiling faces, there was a final image that stood out. A blurry shot showing a strange, glowing orb in the night sky. There was no official explanation for what it was. Investigators made no mention of it in their final report. For decades, the truth remained hidden behind official silence and restricted archives. But in recent years, a new generation of researchers returned to the Dyatlov Pass, this time equipped with modern tools, advanced cameras, drones, and environmental sensors. What they discovered in those same mountains shocked even the most skeptical observers. As the authorities buried the truth beneath red tape and silence, the public began its own investigation, filling in the gaps with speculation, fear, and folklore. From science to superstition, theories that refused to die. Over the years, the Dyatlov Pass incident became a magnet for conspiracy theories. each one attempting to answer the question, what terrified the hikers so badly that they fled barefoot into 30 degrees Celsius blizzard conditions and died scattered in the snow with some horribly injured. One of the most widely accepted ideas is the slab avalanche theory. According to this explanation, a layer of compacted snow above the tent suddenly broke loose and collapsed on the group while they were sleeping. This could have crushed part of the tent and forced them to escape in a hurry. While this theory accounts for the sudden panic in the torn tent, skeptics argue that the slope was too shallow for a real avalanche to occur. Even more puzzling, no typical avalanche debris was found at the scene. Another idea is the infrasound hypothesis. This theory suggests that high winds sweeping over the mountain created a rare phenomenon called a Kármán vortex street, which can generate low-frequency sound waves. These infrasound waves are known to cause intense psychological effects such as panic, nausea, and hallucinations. This might explain why the hikers suddenly fled the tent in a confused state. However, this doesn't account for the more severe physical injuries some of the victims sustained: broken ribs, crushed skulls, and internal trauma with no external wounds. Then, there's the theory involving military testing. At the time, the Soviet military was known to conduct secret weapons experiments in the region. Some believe the hikers might have accidentally wandered into a restricted area or witnessed a weapons test, possibly involving radiation or acoustic weapons. This theory is partly supported by the presence of unexplained radioactive traces on some of the hikers' clothing, and by the intense secrecy that followed the investigation. The bodies were reportedly examined in secret, and some files were classified for years. Still, there is no direct evidence tying the military to the incident. A more far-fetched but persistent theory is that the group encountered a UFO, or some unknown phenomenon. Several locals, including members of the indigenous Mansi people, reported seeing strange lights in the sky around the same time. Some witnesses described glowing orbs or flying spheres moving unnaturally above the mountains. For believers in this theory, the injuries, radiation, and panic could all point to an encounter with something not of this world. Yet, as with the military theory, physical evidence is lacking. Another possibility is criminal involvement. Some have speculated that escaped prisoners, local criminals, or even rogue elements of the KGB could have attacked the group. However, the lack of defensive wounds, missing items, or any signs of struggle at the site make this theory less likely. There was also no apparent motive, and nothing was stolen from the campsite. Each of these theories provides an explanation for some of the strange pieces of the puzzle, but none account for all of them. The panicked flight, the bizarre injuries, the torn tent, the traces of radiation, the lack of external wounds on badly damaged bodies, and the strange lights in the sky. Every answer seems to raise more questions. The truth remained frozen until the 2020s, when science returned to the mountain with new tools and found something no one had before: evidence hidden by both snow and secrecy. Puzrin and Gaume's 2021 research, Reimagining the Slab Avalanche. In January 2021, two scientists, Alexander Puzrin from ETH Zurich and Johann Gaume from EPFL, published a groundbreaking paper that reignited interest in one of Russia's most haunting mysteries: the Dyatlov Pass tragedy. Their work put forward a scientific explanation that had long been doubted: a slab avalanche. But this wasn't the typical avalanche scenario most experts had already dismissed. This one was different. It was smaller, slower, and far more deceptive. For decades, researchers, skeptics, and conspiracy theorists alike had pointed to one key issue: the slope where the hikers camped on Kholat Syakhl was too gentle for an avalanche. It appeared flat in photographs and maps, with a slope angle far below the typical threshold for danger. That single fact had been enough to cast serious doubt on avalanche theories until Puzrin and Gaume looked more closely. They noticed something others had overlooked. Beneath the blanket of smooth, undisturbed snow were hidden steps in the terrain, meter-high drops and shallow cliffs. These small but sharp features created local slope angles between 28 degrees and 30 degrees, which is just steep enough to allow a slab of snow to slide. It was a key detail, not visible in photos, but critical to understanding what may have happened. Then, using weather data and modeling software, they recreated the conditions that night. The hikers had dug into the slope to pitch their tent, a common practice to shield against the wind. But by doing so, they unknowingly removed part of the snowpack's support, leaving a fragile slab above. Throughout the night, strong katabatic winds, fast-moving, downslope winds common in mountainous terrain, blew snow onto the tent site, gradually adding weight and stress to the unstable slab. According to their model, the pressure from the new snow built up slowly. Then, 9 to 13 hours after the tent was set up, the slab finally gave way. It wasn't a roaring avalanche that swept everything away. It was a compact, dense block of snow, around 5 by 5 meters in size, that slid suddenly and with crushing force. And this is where the theory becomes truly chilling. Their physics-based calculations revealed that even a relatively small snow slab could generate enough impact to break ribs and fracture skulls, particularly if the victims were caught between the falling slab and the rigid floor of the tent, which had skis placed underneath for support. This kind of injury matched what the autopsies found: devastating internal trauma, yet strangely, no external wounds. No lacerations, no bruises consistent with falling or being struck by objects. What about the other strange details? They addressed those too. The tent had been slashed from the inside, likely in a panic as the snow collapsed onto them. In the dark, disoriented and injured, the hikers fled the tent without proper clothing or gear, possibly trying to reach the tree line for shelter. Footprints showed they left on foot, not in a rush, which aligns with them escaping a localized collapse rather than a high-speed avalanche. And by the time rescuers arrived weeks later, fresh snowfall and wind had erased any clear signs of an avalanche, especially one so small and localized. Critics had long asked, why wasn't the tent buried? Why weren't bodies swept away? According to the model, the snow slab was just large and heavy enough to cause major injuries, but not deep enough to cover the tent or drag the hikers downhill. Still, other details were left out. What about the missing eyes and tongue? What caused that? In the end, the researchers were careful. They didn't claim to have solved the mystery with finality. Instead, they called it a plausibility study. But for the first time in decades, their work offered a complete and scientifically grounded explanation that accounted for the gentle slope, the injuries, the escape from the tent, and the lack of obvious avalanche traces. It wasn't a supernatural event. It didn't involve secret weapons or government conspiracies. It was, quite possibly, an invisible killer, a silent, creeping buildup of snow pressure that turned a routine camp into a fatal trap. Armed with this refined hypothesis, researchers planned a return expedition to see if nature matched the simulations, and what they filmed was revealingly terrifying. The 2022 Swiss expedition, seeing avalanche in action. Following the attention around Puzerin and Gaum's work, a Swiss research team from EPFL launched a field expedition in January 2022. Their goal was bold and specific: to test the controversial theory that slab avalanches could explain the mysterious deaths of the 9 hikers as developed by Puzerin and Gaume. Armed with modern tools, drones, ground-penetrating radar, weather monitors, and high-speed cameras, they set out to see if the terrain and conditions at Dyatlov Pass could actually produce such avalanches. They chose January, when snow and wind patterns closely mirrored those in February 1959, to make the experiment as accurate as possible. Conditions were brutal. Strong winds, pitch-black nights, and freezing temperatures pushed the team to their limits. But they succeeded. During their expedition, they recorded at least 2 small slab avalanches on slopes within 3 kilometers of the original Dyatlov campsite. These weren't obvious avalanche chutes. The slopes were hidden, steep features not easily noticed without close study. Just like those identified in Puzerin and Gaum's 2021 model, the moment was powerful for the team, especially for Dr. Gaume himself. He explained, "The avalanche is visible, audible, and can break your ribs if it hits you when you are lying down. Traces vanish within minutes under wind-drifted snow." His words weren't theoretical. This was exactly what the team saw unfold. One avalanche they filmed left a debris field that was completely buried by fresh snow within an hour. This finding was crucial. For decades, critics had pointed to the lack of visible avalanche evidence at the Dyatlov campsite as proof that no such event occurred. But the EPFL expedition showed how quickly the traces of even a moderate avalanche could disappear in the region's harsh and windy conditions. The researchers also encountered violent weather firsthand. Snowmobiles and heavy tools were overturned by gusts strong enough to knock people off their feet. These chaotic winds aligned with survivor accounts from 1959, which described extreme environmental forces. The fact that even modern equipment struggled under such conditions reinforced the idea that the hikers were caught in a rapidly deteriorating and dangerous situation. Even more striking was that one of the recorded avalanches matched the exact dimensions predicted by the 2021 model: a 5 by 5 meter slab, sliding off a barely noticeable incline. It may have seemed small, but if such a slab had struck the Dyatlov hikers as they lay inside their tent, on the snow surface and unprotected, it could have caused serious injuries. It also would have made escape impossible for anyone caught beneath, especially in the dark and freezing cold. This real-world evidence filled major gaps left by the 2021 simulation-based study. It proved that slab avalanches do happen in this region, even on slopes that don't look dangerous. It showed how these avalanches can form on hidden steep features, and how their traces can disappear completely within minutes, leaving little to no evidence for rescue teams to find days or weeks later. In short, the fieldwork validated what had previously been just a digital model. Reality and theory were now aligned. The strength of these results led EPFL to organize 3 expeditions between 2021 and 2021, each one building on the last. With every trip, the link between the terrain, the snowpack, and the avalanche behavior became clearer. Thanks to leadership from Puzrin's team and the perseverance of the Swiss researchers, the slab avalanche theory evolved from a plausible explanation into the most scientifically grounded scenario for what happened that night in 1959. But even with all of this new evidence, serious questions remain unanswered. Neither Gomes' model nor the footage captured by the EPFL team fully explains the more disturbing injuries found on some of the victims, like crushed skulls and major internal damage, while others had no broken bones at all. It also doesn't account for the eerie medical oddities, the missing eyes and tongues, the strange states of undress, and the inconsistent patterns of trauma. These anomalies suggest that while a slab avalanche might explain how the tragedy began, it might not explain everything that followed. But all that seems to have changed in 2025. Earlier this year, a group of scientists proposed a theory that might finally solve these gaps. According to them, a delayed slab avalanche landing on someone inside the tent would produce force strong enough to collapse ribs and crush skulls, yet leave the skin and soft tissues largely intact. One expert likened it to being pinned under a slowly lowering car tire, noting that internal injuries could be fatal with minimal external signs. That explained the puzzling medical reports: clean bone breaks, internal hemorrhage, but no visible wounds. The report also solved another long-standing riddle: the missing eyes and tongue of several hikers. Forensic pathologists pointed to natural decomposition and scavenger activity in exposed cold ravines. With the bodies lying for days under snow or water, predators like foxes or birds could remove soft tissues from faces. Cold water can also accelerate tissue breakdown. The report concluded clearly that there was no evidence of violence, only nature reclaiming exposed flesh. This 2025 breakthrough wasn't immediately published, but senior researchers have quietly shared it with top universities and institutions. One scientist involved said, "Every piece of this simulation matches what we know from the scene, and there are no major gaps left. Seems the Dyatlov mystery is finally solved." Others refer to it privately as the most accurate reconstruction in decades. Taken together, these researches provide a clear, evidence-based answer. A subtle slab avalanche, triggered by snow accumulation on overlooked cliffs, slid onto the hiker's tent. They fled in confusion and fear. Some were crushed on the spot, others succumbed to the cold. The injuries, once mysterious, were scientifically normal under those conditions. The missing soft tissues were not signs of foul play. They were tragic byproducts of nature. What once seemed unexplainable now fits tightly into place. And yet, even as the scientific community begins to close the case, the Dyatlov Pass incident continues to haunt the public imagination. Because this wasn't just a mystery of snow and science. It was a story about fear, survival, and how the unknown shapes our perception of truth. The 2025 reconstruction may answer the how, but it doesn't erase the human weight of the loss. It doesn't make the empty tent any less eerie, or the frozen faces any less heartbreaking. What it does, however, is offer something rare in a case long clouded by speculation: clarity. Not from conspiracy, but from careful study. Not from horror, but from hard-earned understanding. In solving the physical mystery, scientists may have finally allowed the hiker's story to rest, not as victims of the supernatural, but as brave souls caught in the unforgiving mechanics of the natural world. What do you think about the Dyatlov mystery? Thank you for watching. See you in the next video. Feel free to share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Want more videos like this? Then subscribe to the channel for more eye-opening stories. Thank you so much for staying with us till the end. See you in the next video.